Despite being 55 years old, Joe Rogan looks like an absolute beast. You can tell the guy loves taking care of himself, and in a recent episode of the JRE, the UFC commentator has just revealed the secret to his fitness. Joe also corrected himself after sharing this really weird litter box story and told viewers why he fell for it in the first place. Keep watching this video for more on both stories.
There's also an issue with momentum. You're not used to doing it. It's not a part of your life. It's not something that you're accustomed to pushing yourself.
First up, hot sauna, cold plunge. Joe Rogan is a prime example of how literally anyone can get ripped. Of course, it's not easy, but if you exercise regularly and follow a strict diet like Joe, then it's possible. But that's not all he does to stay fit. We'll get to his diet and training routine in a bit, but did you know the 55-year-old actually has a secret to his fitness? Yep, believe it or not, Rogan has this crazy routine where he steps inside a sauna after a grueling workout, immediately followed by a plunge in ice-cold water. Just thinking about it is making us shiver. The sauna is probably like heaven, but the cold plunge? Now that's tricky. But why does Joe follow the hot sauna cold plunge technique? Well, after finishing a really intense workout, your heart is pounding. It's beating at a really high pace, and if you step into the sauna right after a workout, it stays high. Or in simple words, the sauna sessions keep the heart pounding, leading to increased blood flow. And a cold plunge right after the sauna releases endorphins and adrenaline, putting the body and mind into high performance mode. It's not exactly a new practice or something, but it's something not many of us would be willing to do. And those who are willing to do it look like Joe. So it's pretty obvious how beneficial the hot sauna cold plunge actually is. The technique was actually revealed to Joe by Max Lugavere, who shared how he had this really unique life-changing experience after he followed the practice.
The way data is illustrated in this paper, as it is in research, generally it's called a Western blot, which is like a visual representation of data, the presence of proteins and so forth.
Next, eating to function. Have you ever noticed how fit people don't look at food the same way as us? Or if you're someone who eats only for functionality, then you can probably relate to this. It's like when you see a super buff bodybuilder eating boiled chicken without salt or anything and ask them how they're even eating it. All they say is they're taking protein. Not eating chicken, but taking protein. It's all about functionality for people like Joe. He follows a really strict diet, and honestly speaking, when you look at how energetic he is, for a guy in his mid-50s, it shows he watches what he eats. Joe stays away from carbohydrates and refined sugar. He doesn't go anywhere near that stuff, and if you knew why, you'd probably reduce your consumption as well. But that's a story for some other day. Right now, we're going to tell you about how Rogan doesn't eat anything for at least 14 to 16 hours a day. And while that probably sounds really shocking, intermittent fasting has a ton of benefits for the human body. The UFC commentator usually gets his first meal after a workout, followed by lunch, a snack, and dinner. Oh, and his 16-hour fasting usually starts after he's had the last meal of the day. Healthy food, a lot of vegetables, and a lot of game meat, mostly wild game. So nothing special or over the top, just the usual fruits, veggies, and a lot of meat. Elk meat in specific. He loves that stuff. Moving on, a versatile training routine. Like his diet, Joe doesn't make things complicated and prefers to keep things super simple. We have cardio, weightlifting, and the occasional MMA routines. And while the podcast host exercises to stay fit and on top of his game, he's tremendously skilled in jiu-jitsu and martial arts. He actually has to avoid physical confrontations because he's capable of killing people with the amount of skill he has. But yeah, he doesn't exactly compete or something and enjoys doing mixed martial arts training since it helps him with flexibility and muscularity. And even when it comes to weight training, Joe prefers sticking to the basics like the bench press and squat, but isn't afraid to throw in some battle ropes or kettlebells either. He usually hits the gym 3 to 4 days a week with a day or two specifically for yoga. You're probably wondering though, is there anything he doesn't do? The weight training, cardio, and MMA makes sense, but why in the world is he doing yoga? Well, apart from having a ton of benefits for the body, Joe specifically does yoga for mental fortitude. And when he's done with all the training, he does the hot sauna cold plunge technique. For a guy who's reaching 60, it's crazy how the commentator manages to put himself through so much training and control. He's a guy who loves to enjoy life, and we've seen him quite a few times lighting one up or sipping a drink on the podcast. But apart from that, Joe is really serious about his fitness.
Maybe they, lightly work out at the gym or something like that. What particular exercises do you think are the best to achieve that result?
Following up, the litter box story. Now for that really weird litter box story we mentioned earlier. So apparently what happened was a school had to install a litter box in the washroom because there was a girl who identified as a cat. Or in the words of the man himself, had to install a litter box in the girls' room because there is a girl who's a furry who identifies as an animal. Look, guys, we're no one to say anything to anyone, but has anyone noticed how things tend to take a really strange turn on the Joe Rogan podcast? And honestly speaking, we find it a bit hard to believe that a school would actually do that for a single student. We've heard of things like furry conventions and stuff, and while it might not be your cup of tea, there are people who, at the end of the day, identify as animals. Or not even identify, maybe it's an activity they enjoy doing. And the fact that the story went viral is no surprise either, since this is the Joe Rogan Experience we're talking about, the #1 podcast in the world. He was telling his guest, Tulsi Gabbard, in episode 1880, and said it was actually his wife's friend who told him the story about the litter box. Now, we already know Joe has a habit of talking about some mind-boggling things, so when we first heard about the litter box story, we weren't exactly surprised it came from him. Up next, there's no proof. A lot of people started calling out Joe for telling a false story, and about 8 podcasts later, the 55-year-old also said it probably never happened since there was no proof. But did you know Joe actually went the extra mile to verify the story? Not only did he call his wife's friend in an attempt to get more details about the litter box, but he also sent a couple of inquiries to the school. Imagine how weird that must be though, getting an email or a phone call from Joe Rogan asking you about whether the school actually installed a litter box or not. And as for his wife's friend, she had no juicy details since she stopped working at the school a long time back. Now, Joe didn't exactly apologize or something, and to be fair, he didn't need to either. It's not like he named anyone, right? All he did was share a story he heard. It could have been true or false, and after not finding enough evidence, Joe himself said it probably never happened. And there's actually a reason why Rogan believed the litter box story. The MMA commentator saw something really similar at a UFC event in Pittsburgh. Last but not least, a whole convention. The reason why Joe fell for the story is that he actually walked into a furry convention one time in Pittsburgh. The hotel he was supposed to stay at was hosting some sort of convention with a lot of people dressed up as animals just chilling in the hotel lobby. This was about 10 years back, and Joe didn't really make anything of it since he'd seen just about everything by that time. But when he walked up to the reception to check in, the guy working the front desk started telling him about how crazy things were getting because of the convention. The participants were asking for their drinks and food to be delivered in bowls, so, they could eat like animals. And they even asked the hotel staff to put a couple of litter boxes in the lobby, and if you ask us, we don't think they could, because that would have been a bit weird. But after hearing this story, it's no surprise why Joe fell for the litter box story in the first place. For a guy who's seen a whole convention, a litter box in a washroom must be pretty ordinary. That's it from our side, folks. So what do you think? Is Joe Rogan the fittest guy you know for a 55-year-old? And did you fall for the litter box story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more exciting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time.